Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of DarshanTalks. We have Angela Wagner with us again today. And Angela, as some of you may already know, because we've done a few of these already, Angela is working on her master's thesis at the University of the Sciences, where she is working on her master's in biomedical writing. And her final thesis is on trust and what is the origination of trust between patients and pharma. Why has it suffered so far? And what can we do to fix it? And Angela, you want to introduce yourself and then talk about what we've done so far. Just a quick recap, and we go from there.
Sounds good. Thank you, Darshan. Well, my name is Angela Wagner, and I'm a full-time student in the biomedical writing program at University of the Sciences. I'm working on my final capstone or thesis project, and I'm really excited about it. I think it's great. Obviously, otherwise I probably wouldn't be doing it. Just in a quick nutshell, my project deals with trust between patients and pharmaceutical companies. And the question, I'm kind of coming at it from a medical writing standpoint, is how do we communicate with patients in a way that will help engender patient trust? So in order to do this, I actually created a new model of trust. I wasn't entirely satisfied with any existing model, and I felt that existing models didn't really address the complexity of the relationship between patient and pharma, because it's not exactly the same as patient and doctor. It's not the same as employee and employer. It's not the same as consumer and business. So it's kind of its own little world. But just really quickly, the model that incorporates only empirical evidence from the last 10 years. So all human studies on trust, and only within the last 10 years, just to keep it fresh and new. I thought, why not? Why not try the newest and greatest? It's not to say that the older models or older studies are not valid, because of course they are. And a lot of the newer studies sort of built on the older ones. So, I'm not suggesting we should abandon all work on trust and start over necessarily, but I wanted to keep it fresh. So basically, my model of trust includes four precepts. They are benevolence, which translates kind of to altruism in this model, and it's always something that is value added. It can never be anything that directly benefits the pharmaceutical company. The second piece is attunement, which includes the ideas of awareness, response, and harmony. It has to be a two-way interaction, where benevolence does not. It can involve direct benefit to the pharmaceutical company, which again, benevolence does not. And a lot of it involves the establishment, or the negotiation that ends up with a sense of aligned goals, if you will, where the patient and believes that pharma understands and is responding, and they kind of have the same goals in mind for the patient. The third concept is integrity. That one is fairly straightforward. And I was able to find some studies that addressed integrity specifically for written materials, which will matter today, because we're going to discuss web analysis today. And the fourth one is competence, which is both the understanding that the trust object, which in this case is the pharmaceutical company, has great knowledge, comparatively to the patient. They have specialized knowledge, they have a high level of knowledge, but it also involves communicating that knowledge in a way that the patient can understand, without having to do too much effort. So understanding easily is part of it. So that's the model in a nutshell, and we're going to go today and look at my methodology for doing a web analysis. Which
Before you do that, Angela,
yeah.
you also talked about the Twitter analysis.
Yeah.
So you want to do a very brief description of what
I
you
will
did?
do a very brief description, because otherwise we won't understand where the information is coming from. So in an earlier session, we discussed the part of the methodology where I created a list of pharmaceutical brand names. And this list was based mostly on ad spend. So high ad spend, no generic, it went on the list. And so what I did after that was create the methodology where I pulled data from Twitter to sort of get an idea of the sentiment that patients have for these various brands. And I wanted to see if they were more trusting, more neutral, or more, distrusting or lack of trust. And I'm not going to get into those, the lack of trust or distrust too much. I think that might actually be a completely different study. But certainly, is trust there? Is there really no way to tell if trust is there, or is there no trust? So we did discuss that, how to pull it from Twitter and create a spreadsheet and then do a manual sentiment analysis on it. And then what I'm going to do in this session is talk about how I'm going to examine various components of all of these 18 brand websites and report that data. And then at the end, we'll look at the sentiment versus what I found and see if they correlate or not. Does that make sense, Darshan? Did I miss anything?
I thought you were great.
All right, cool. All right, so now we're going to look at the outline briefly, and then I do have a slide deck to kind of make things easier, because there are some things that you can't really explain with an outline. Pictures are better. So we're going to start with the outline, and I'm going to share that. There it is. All right, we'll have to let me know if it is big enough. Does not look like it's big enough, does it? Better? Still not good? We can do 150. Make it nice and big. Okay.
It's
all
big
right.
Enough, strong enough, and doggone it, people like you.
There you go. Motivational speaker. All right. So earlier I discussed, why did I want to examine websites? And the thing that was most salient was that actually more than half of patients who were surveyed went to a pharmaceutical website first. Before they saw a doctor, before they learned anything about a condition, they went to a pharmaceutical brand website and looked up information. And that was very interesting. So it really looks like a pharmaceutical patient-facing website is a big touch point for patients. So it made sense to analyze, certain measures of trust that they may or may not have, and that are not necessarily regulatory in nature. So with that being said, we're going to consider the web analysis today. And my assumption starting out was that patients are visiting these sites to look for answers to certain questions. And the questions that I formulated, and if any of you disagree or you think there are other questions that should be addressed, please let me know. Go to tinyurl.com/model of trust. And you will find the outline. And if you have the link, you are welcome to comment on the outline, and I will definitely review those. So that would be great.
For
all right. So
those of you who can't see it, it's actually on the page as well. So you should be able to see the tiny URL link.
Thank you, Darshan.
No problem.
All right. So I'm asking, if I'm a patient, I'm going to a brand website that is patient-facing, and I want to know, what conditions does this medication treat? I also want to know, is there something I should know about this condition? How familiar is the patient with the condition? We're not sure. So we're going to assume that, yeah.
Just to be clear, you made this assumption, correct? Or
I did. All these assumptions are mine, except for the one that has a source, actually. There is one with a source, because it's a strange one.
Yeah.
It did not, follow logically in my mind. So yes, these are all my assumptions. So again, if you disagree, I'd love to hear. So what conditions does it treat? What should I know about these conditions? Is there knowledge the pharmaceutical company has that they can share with me about the condition? How is the medication administered? Where is it administered? Geographically, do I need to go to an infusion center? Can I do it at home? Can I just pick it up at the pharmacy? How often is it administered? How well does it work? And interestingly, which healthcare provider should I see about this condition? Which kind of makes sense, but I was surprised that was a common issue with patients, and that actually came from the Patient Digital Trends 2019 report. I believe that was from doctor.com. So patients want to know this. Now, do patients want to know about safety? Oh, sorry, I haven't gotten to the end of my list. There's more. How much does it cost? How can I get help paying for this medication? Is there someone I can contact if I have a question? someone other than the doctor or healthcare provider.
Considering reimbursement will be very personal, how is it fair to expect a pharmaceutical company to address the question of how much does it cost?
Well, they may not have an answer to that.
Okay.
And obviously they wouldn't know. They'd have to know your insurance coverage, your geographical area. I mean, there's a lot of questions. But patients, they would wonder, how much does it cost?
Fair enough.
And they would probably discover when they contacted the pharmaceutical company rep, who's usually a third party, that they wouldn't be able to answer that.
So what you're saying is these are the questions people come with, not necessarily the questions that pharma is expected to answer.
Right. Just the questions that patients would have.
Correct.
So,
okay.
So how can I get help paying for it? And that obviously is going to be helpful regardless of how much it costs, because we're going to assume that these are, fairly expensive therapies for the average person. It's, probably not going to be a $10 copay. And obviously, because these are all brand drugs. And as far as I'm aware, brand drugs are almost never tier 1. So, there will be cost questions involved, I think. And who can I contact if I have questions? And again, I would think traditionally you'd ask your doctor, but it turns out that patients apparently want to be able to ask Pharma directly, or someone they think is Pharma directly. Now, of course, they're going to want to know about safety. Is this safe for me to take?
I have a question. So why would a patient want to ask Pharma directly? Wouldn't that imply the presence of trust?
Well, it would imply an opportunity for trust. Willingness to communicate would be an opportunity for trust. If you already trust Pharma, then you would have no problem knowing, you'd know how to contact them already. You wouldn't have to ask.
So,
but that is an interesting point. But I think it's more opportunity and willingness to trust.
So I wonder if there are different levels of trust, as opposed to a yes.
Well, I mean, there are. The studies that I happened to find mostly talked about the fact that trust is iterative. So, you start out with a little bit of trust, you interact with the same object of trust multiple times, and you get more trust. So it starts out, you've got the willingness to trust, which actually is innate. It's something that people have varying levels of. And then, from there you interact with, let's say, the pharmaceutical company, and you're like, okay, this is all right. I can try this again. Or if you have a bad experience, no, I don't think I want to do that again. So, there is a sort of gradual increase in trust. And I think that would probably be worth doing another study on.
What's the question that we want to study, though, there?
Oh, the question that we want to study is, how is trust maintained? Does it increase over time? Does it remain steady? Does it decrease? I mean, we know it can do all of these three things, but what are the factors?
Do you want to make that? Do you want to have a list of open questions we haven't answered?
Well, actually, it's at the bottom of the outline under the conclusions, future studies.
Awesome.
But, so come look at the outline and see what, what I think would be great for a future study, or if you have an idea, please put it in the comments. I would appreciate it.
Awesome.
All right. So addressing the safety questions, often on a pharmaceutical site, those are addressed by the ISI because the ISI is, pretty much at the bottom of any page that has a claim on it. So, ISI is a little bit different. And Darshan, I know you and I discussed this a little bit recently. Because the ISI, it's uniform for the product.
ISI is for those.
Important safety information.
Okay, and who is it aimed for?
It is patient facing.
Okay, and who designs it?
Well, I don't believe it is actually a regulatory document. There are, things that come from the FDA recommending that these, that safety information be updated, whenever the labeling is updated. But it's not directly reviewed by the FDA as far as I am aware. So, it certainly gets a lot of legal review, I am sure.
Yeah.
But it is something that the pharma company will update. But it's one ISI for the product. So it doesn't matter whether it's, on the site or on social media or in written materials. It's kind of a little bit different than what I'm wanting to study, which is the variations.
Right.
among the websites, and I think you're not going to get quite so much variation with ISI. It's pretty formulaic.
Fair enough.
So decided to exclude it, but again, that would make a great study, just looking at the ISI and looking for variations in a much larger group, I think, than what I'm going to be studying today. All right, so I'm actually going to scroll down to my table, which sadly is now too large to see. I don't know if I make it larger. Can we see it? There we go.
It works.
So I took actually the questions that patients would ask, and I did the corresponding component that I will analyze, and I think maybe this makes it a little easier to see. So for example, for which conditions does the medication treat? We're going to be looking at the homepage, the indication landing pages.
Quick question. Again, is this your assumption that this is where they'd show up?
This is my assumption, yes. So if someone, believes that there is a better page to use, please let me know. And all the sites are slightly different. I looked at a few different brands just as a test, and they may call them different things, but it seems like the information is grouped, so that the website component would address, which information is held, somewhere that pertains to this. So they combine things a little differently. They separate things a little differently. So it's not just as simple as, go to, this page will always have your disease awareness information, or this page will always have your route of administration information. And again, I'm not looking at the prescribing information directly because that is not patient facing. And I'm also not looking directly at the medication guide because that is a regulatory document. And, not all drugs have a medication guide. So I want to make sure that the answers can be found in the website content without having to go to the PI or the ISI or medication guide. I guess I'll keep going. Was there a question?
Nope. Now, for example, I do have a question.
Okay.
When I contact someone if I have questions, so doesn't this assume, for example, that this is patient-facing? Because I've seen a lot of websites that'll have doctor-facing and patient-facing, and that's split up.
Yeah.
So how do you are you suggesting that they've already gotten into the patient-facing and now they're looking?
Yeah, these are all on the patient website.
Yeah. Okay.
And typically if you go to click on the healthcare website, they put up a little disclaimer box that I don't know if it keeps people out of the the healthcare provider website or not. I've always found it kind of humorous. Are you a healthcare provider? If you are not a healthcare provider, do not cross. Okay. But
it's actually a question people wonder, because I'm involved in a couple of groups, and is that sufficient to say that I'm going to share healthcare provider specific information, or do you need to take a more onerous checking requirement? Is one of the questions you're trying to figure out. But
yeah, that's actually a really good question. I mean, there may be a certain level of patient who would get way more out of the HCP site.
Yeah.
But how do you know? I mean, do people accidentally stumble into the healthcare provider site and then not understand what's going on?
Or more appropriately, do healthcare providers go to that site? I know I wouldn't.
To the HCP site or the patient site?
I probably wouldn't go to an HCP site.
Really?
The information I want is I have databases that are way more advanced than that.
That is interesting. Although I know that some of the HCP sites actually have login information where the pharma company has a patient enrollment system that they can get into, and you can only access it through the HCP site. So maybe utilization is different. It would be interesting to see data on which pages are being interacted with the most.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's true. And I mean, are you getting the information from your rep anyway, where you wouldn't need to go on the site?
Yeah.
Interesting. I can tell you it's a lot of work on an HCP site.
Is it really?
A lot of work. Well, there's a lot of work on a patient site too.
Yeah.
Right. We kind of wandered off into the weeds there.
Yeah,
so
sorry about that.
Bringing it back. So, other information, how often is the medication administered? It should be a dosing information page, but again, it's organized differently on each website. So, I will, as I do the spreadsheets and go through and do the research gathering, I will mention, the URL, and I will try to make sure everything is very clear as far as where was this information found, which I think is probably the best I can do. I'm hoping it doesn't introduce any bias. I haven't found where information is necessarily repeated on the patient sites on different pages, aside from like the ISI that is, again, on the bottom of every page with a claim. So there doesn't seem to be a lot of repetition, which should help. All right, moving.
Why do you think it introduces bias?
Well, okay, for example, drug X, they put their route of admin, their dosing information, possibly some efficacy data on one page. And then drug Y puts it, they put some efficacy information on a similar page, but then they also put efficacy information on a completely different page. So, if I only grab this one page, am I missing something?
Right.
I'm introducing bias because I have not analyzed all content available.
That's fair. So then you should probably list that.
Yeah, I'll make a note about, got a lot of limitations going on this study now. But
I think that's exactly the point, right? You've analyzed every step of it, and you're coming up with here are some steps that you could have done differently and come to different results.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So I'm trying, but again, I probably will miss something. So if anybody out there notices something I have missed, please do let me know. Okay, moving along. I did not review the ISI. I also did not review prescribing information, and I think I've explained why. And then I go through and talk about the exact laptop that I am using, the monitor, the connection that I have, because I'm not really working so much on like load times, like page load times. I thought about it in terms of user experience.
Why would that affect trust?
Well, actually, if it takes too long to load a page, trust will decrease. And I did go through and look at studies that talk specifically about load times, page load times.
Interesting. You didn't even know that was a thing. Okay.
And some of the sites, actually, most of the sites are very, very image heavy. And they've got a lot of videos. And someone who may live in a rural area and has, terrible internet, where I grew up, they still have dial-up. It's 2021 and they only have dial-up. So that would affect them. It would affect people in similar parts of the country, or, people who, for whatever reason, are not getting a good connection. So, it is something to study, but I don't know that it was really working well within the confines of this study. It was sort of wandering off, and didn't want to do that. But yeah, it does make a difference. Also, looking at mobile design versus desktop design, there are some trust issues there as well. The information is rearranged a little bit depending on how you design the pages, how you design the style sheets for the pages can make a big difference. So again, that would be something that would be interesting to study, but not here. I think we've got, with my 36-page outline, we've got enough.
I think so.
Okay. So as far as the testing methods that I'm employing, I thought we'd talk just a little bit about website usability and user experience, because that is the standard that I went for. I'm somewhat familiar with user experience testing, and it seemed like a good place to start when you're testing a website. And what I found is that for the most part, what usability testing involves actual human interaction with the website or computer system or network, actually all three. And those are used a lot for web-based trust studies, but because it's a third-party analysis, I'm trying to figure out, what would a patient think of this, or what would a patient think of that. So I'm trying to use, aspects that already have rules for them. So if we look at the WWAMI survey, which is kind of a standard, standard.
But what is the WWAMI survey testing?
It is testing the visual design, the navigation framework, and the appropriateness of the content for the user's purpose, which means you can apply it to anything. You could apply it to pharma websites, you could apply it to e-commerce websites, you could go to governmental websites, you could use WAMI for all of these.
But what does this impact in our 4 factors?
Well, let's get there. I wanted to show what it was before I explain how not so helpful it was for me. So if we look at the survey, you can see a couple of the questions. For example, this website has much that is of interest to me. That's pretty vague. This website seems logical to me. Well, that's also pretty vague. The pages on this website are very attractive. Also, not the most useful for my purposes, right? Because I can't necessarily know what the patient will find attractive, although there are studies, and I had talked about some of those, that there are actually like symmetry and use of white space. And symmetry in particular is useful for men. So men like website symmetry, women really don't care so much. That is actually a trust measure, but again, I feel like we had more than enough things to study already. So this is why WAMI doesn't necessarily work, and other user experience testing is somewhat similar in that it's very subjective. But there were actually a few measures that would work, and we can look at them here. So contacting a brand representative, that is something we can use. Ease of understanding information, that's clearly competence. Contacting a brand representative is clearly attunement. There was someone who took the WAMI survey and kind of applied it to an academic website, and he decided the ease of use was also appropriate, and that works for me. That is a little bit different than ease of understanding information, and that will come to play in attunement a little bit. Also, evidence that information is regularly being updated, that will be integrity. And ease of navigation kind of depends on what you're studying. It could be integrity, it could be attunement, it could be competence. Wouldn't necessarily be benevolence, but it could be the other 3. But there are certain content issues that just don't come up in this usability testing. But there are other studies that have addressed specifically content and tools that are used to examine content, and I will use some of those. For example, the Flesch-Kincaid testing, discern testing, and we'll talk about those next, actually. So any questions before I move on?
No, I think we're good.
All right, so now I'm going to unshare my screen, and I'm going to move into sharing the deck that I put together. It is a very rough deck. It's not really, it's not designed to be pretty. This is all about, just trying to get the outline all set, get the research started. So it's rough, but I'm hoping it will explain what I need to show. So can you see my screen?
Can now.
Okay. Is it large enough? Because I can't see. I'm hoping it's large enough. I don't know that I can make it larger.
It's large.
All right. So now we're going to talk about examining healthcare provider directories, which is my favorite example of benevolence, actually. And this is an example of the methodology. So if we want to look at the healthcare provider directory, I used Cosentix as an example because it's one brand that I knew had a healthcare provider directory. So step 1 is we look for Find a Doctor. In this case, Find a Doctor is on the plaque psoriasis indication landing page. We click Go Now, and it takes us to number 2, which is the results. And I went ahead and did Houston because that's where I am. And we see, it's got a nice map going. We've got a list of doctors or other practitioners who are seeing patients. So from there, we're going to click on View Doctor. We're going to pick on Dr. Nguyen, the dermatologist. So if we click on View Doctor, we then go to this pop-up window. It actually is the same page address URL as the last one, so I didn't add a new URL. It's just the Find a Dermatologist link if anybody wants to go out and try it. And we can see on number 3 here, when we look at Dr. Nguyen's profile, that it's showing the Health Grades logo, which is a third-party directory. So it appears that there is a direct link to the the Healthgrades site, which tells me that this is third party. And that was one of the things that I'm checking for. I want to know, is there a directory? Is it a third party directory? Is it, are they showing specific types of information? Patients in particular have asked for scheduling ability, the ability to schedule on, on this directory, wherever it takes you. Can you schedule with the doctor immediately from there? Which again, struck me as odd that you'd want the pharmaceutical company to give you that sort of information. But according to the survey, yes, they did. These are all things that patients have admitted that they wanted. And we can see if we click on the information, in this case, I clicked on the 10 to 15 minute average wait time. It popped up a window that let me know it was going to send me to a third-party site. And when I clicked on that, it did in fact send me out to Healthgrades directly to see that information. And that is a good thing. We obviously want a third-party directory. There are potential legal issues if it's not a third-party directory. Keeping in mind that this is not legal advice, and that if I can't determine whether it's a third-party directory or not, it doesn't mean that it's not a third-party directory and I just can't figure it out. That is a possibility. But I wanted to explain how I was getting there. Yes.
Quick question for you, Angela. Now, in these scenarios, the fact that they're using a third-party directory, does that contaminate our judgment of trust because they're using someone else's trust, i.e. the Healthgrades trust?
Well, go ahead. Sorry.
No. You tell me. I mean, I think you understand the thrust of my question.
Well, it could be either one. Coming from my standpoint, obviously a third party is much better, and I would feel much more trust knowing that they were using a third party.
Right.
Because there is no chance of anti-kickback issues at all if you make it obvious that it's a third party. At the same time, patients might be confused. So I think that is why this particular site, it uses the Healthgrades logo, but it keeps it fairly small. It maintains, the brand coloring, the nice, can't remember what color it is, but that Cosentyx sort of berry red or dark pink.
Right.
So it maintains, the look of the site, but it's also saying, yeah, this is outside information. I'm not sure how we would go about knowing whether that was increasing patient trust or decreasing it. And that would actually probably need to be a new study as well. So I'll make a note about the limitation of the directory and how it would be good to know these things. And it's possible that there's some sort of a study out there. I just maybe haven't seen it. So, this is what we're doing. And again, third party, always a good thing. Whether the patient, recognizes it or whether that affects trust, I'm not sure. All right, so this would be how I'm going to test to see, is there a directory? What can the directory do? Once I get past the, in this case, the Cosentyx site, I will check and make sure that, see if there is scheduling available or not, because I think it varies by third party. And again, there are actually many third parties that do directories. Some of them include, professional organizations, and some of them are governmental, and some of them are private. And this, Healthgrades, as far as I know, is a private company. So there are a number of directories, but patients, they can find some of the other directories that are not plugins, maybe a little bit confusing. They can't filter by languages spoken, or, searching for geographic area may be more difficult. This one has a map. And again, I'm not really looking to see, not looking to compare them with each other. I just want to see if each site has one and if it has the functionality that the study that I read indicated was important to patients. So if we see that the directory does not have a clear logo that suggests that it is associated with a third party, what do we do? And I wanted to show this as well. It's important that the directory be sort of targeting the group of patients that are trying to use the site. So in the case of Cosentyx, they actually have a completely different directory for rheumatology than they do for dermatology. So I did the same thing again that I did before, only this time I started at the landing page for ankylosing spondylitis. And actually you can see that the wording is different. It says specifically find a rheumatologist, whereas last time it was find a dermatologist. So we go to the website, go to that page, click on Go Now, and now it pops up results for rheumatologists. And we can actually see that it looks a little bit different. The pictures are a little bit different here than they were for dermatology, and we'll see why in a minute. But we are going to click on Dr. Halaf, and then we go to number 3 here, and we can see that this is actually a doctor.com directory, whereas dermatology was Healthgrades. So they're using 2 different directories. I'm not sure why. I'm sure there's some reason.
That was going to be my question.
Really not sure why. I mean, they seem to be competing directories. It's possible that they wanted to be more equitable. It's possible they got better pricing overall if they split it up. I'm not sure why. So, I clicked on the insurances accepted button, and now it brings up that same pop-up window that tells me that I'm going to a third-party site. So at this point, I can assume that, yes, we know it's a third-party site. We know that we're going to a third-party site. If we click OK, obviously it's a third-party site. Well, what would happen if I didn't know?
Quick question for you.
Yeah.
We've got Christine Naro, who's suggesting it would be very helpful to have a directory for clinical research investigators. Would that be appropriate for patients for this format?
It could be.
Why is that?
There's a big push to get patients more involved in research.
Okay.
I mean, we always want patients to be involved in research,
Sure.
but there are actually directories out there that deal specifically with clinical studies, and you often will see those at with like doctor practices that are associated with research hospitals.
But would that be on a product website?
That would be interesting. I'm not sure, from a legal standpoint, if that would, would that be the same as getting clearance to do a healthcare provider directory? Would it be different? I mean, certainly it would be useful, and there are certainly patients who are interested in clinical studies.
Sure.
But yeah, is this the best venue for it? Is there a better venue? I mean, you can go out to, some of the patient, disease organizations that are, that are patient facing, and they will have, lists, maybe not of researchers, but they may have lists of studies. Now, some of them do have lists of, pre-approved specialists, especially if it's a rare condition, which
here's a
may
question.
feed into the directory.
One of the things we've talked about in our factors is beneficence, and to that point, saying these are the physicians who worked on the studies for this drug. Does that add to the trust that patients can have to go, was my doctor one of these? Can I trust the information coming from him or her?
That would be interesting. And I mean, I know it depends. There are, obviously some researchers who never see patients, and there are some who regularly see patients.
Right.
I think there's a full gamut because I, personally have tried to see someone that I knew was a research-based physician, and it was either completely impossible or almost impossible
to
get an appointment. So I can see why that would be something you might want to have.
Right.
I don't know. I almost think that falls into the category of why do they not list published articles about studies on pharmaceutical websites?
Because some of it might be off-label, and if it's off-label,
sure. Well, yeah, but they're not going to put. I mean, on a pharmaceutical website, they're not going to include off-label use. They like the research would be off-label, sure, but I mean, like, if you're looking for ankylosing spondylitis and you're wanting to know, which doctors worked on the studies for this.
Right.
Are they doctors I'm familiar with?
Right.
Then you wouldn't necessarily be looking for off-label because
my point is, if you publish a study.
Yeah, it's a published study.
No.
But go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. if you publish the study and the study's on your website and the study is by a doctor and it's well respected, but if it's an off-label indication, chances are a lot of compliance departments would feel uncomfortable with it because
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
and that becomes problematic. The other question that sort of pops up is, let's deal with that one first. So my question is it? I like the idea of saying here's the research, but is a patient website the location for those studies, or should there be a quote unquote lay summary of the study that is better placed there?
It's possible that a lay summary may be, a much better choice. And I know Europe is already moving,
Right.
swiftly forward about the lay versions of these studies, and that would certainly make sense. I mean, if you put the study article out there, what percentage of patients are going to find it useful? Because really, when it comes down to patient trust, it's not really about whether the patient can understand it or not is a primary concern. So, it's important to explain it so that it is understandable. Now, obviously, some patients, they want to see the actual, article in a journal, and that would be more useful to them. But yeah, what percentage of people would rather have the patient-centric report? And I think, probably a lot of them.
And this is a sort of an interesting concept. Christine also points out, my coworker and I were chatting also about creating one where sponsors could find out how many studies each investigator had and how many subjects are enrolled in each one to assist with site feasibility as well as beneficence. The question, the concern, the advantage this could have is it could tell you Dr. Smith worked on 4 of the studies associated with this drug, while Dr. Jones worked on 1. So do you trust Dr. Smith more when they prescribe this drug because they were intimately involved in the research and saw patients as early as they could, or does it actually maybe reduce the trust because Dr. Smith almost feels invested in that drug and therefore is biased towards the drug? Any thoughts?
Well, that would involve discerning what the truth is, and obviously the truth is a philosophical concept. So it has individual roots. Your idea of truth, my idea of truth, they may be different. So I think the best we can hope to do is to give the information that can be used to decide what the truth is. But we can't necessarily force truth, right? Because it would be far too difficult.
Okay.
But I do think that is an interesting concept. And actually I've found that on specific doctor sites. So if you go to the practice and then you click on the doctor, certain practices will include research that the doctor has done. They'll include it in the overview of clinical interests. But yeah, as far as putting all those things together into one directory, that might make sense.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, let's continue.
Definitely. All right. More fun and frolic with ankylosing spondylitis. All right, so let's say that it wasn't easy to find, that I couldn't see doctor.com and I needed to know, all right, how am I going to evaluate whether this is a third-party plugin or not? Because obviously I want it to be. So I will explain how to do this, or how I decided to do this. And again, if someone sees where I've done it wrong or has a better idea, I would love to hear it. So the first step,
Angela, before you continue, this is a really interesting comment that came through from Christine.
Sure.
The subjects always ask how many of your patients are in the study, what percentage of subjects have had successful treatments, etc. We usually refer them to previous trial data on clinicaltrials.gov. So I do think this would improve beneficence. I think the comment is interesting, which is to know how many patients were involved in the studies, how many at my doctor's office were involved in the studies, if possible, which may be less possible, I think. But I think it would increase trust for me as a patient to understand, am I the first one, or are there many others?
That is true. That is true. That's actually a really good point.
I thought of that.
Yeah, and that definitely could feed into trust. And I know there's also been a big push lately, with getting patients more involved in studies to try and be more transparent about, not specifically the way this specific study is conducted, but the way that, that physician researchers are involved in the studies, and trying to balance their roles as researchers against their roles as care providers.
Right, absolutely.
And interestingly, I have found, just from looking at some research that was out there, that a lot of times patients don't understand the difference between being a research participant and being a patient, and that maybe should be, somehow that should be explained so that it makes more sense to them. And I'm really not sure whose role that would be. I mean, I know that, when you do an informed consent, you're trying to explain that, this is separate from any care that you will receive, but for some reason, it doesn't seem to sink in.
Okay.
Yeah. So many interesting things you find when you're researching. So much fun to be had on PubMed. All right, so to confirm the use of a third-party plugin using Chrome, first you access the developer tools, which is at you start with the section on the right of the browser window, and you open up more tools and then developer tools, and that will open this interesting little console. And you select the network tab, make sure we're looking for JavaScript requests, and that actually is the default usually. And from there, I know you're on the edge of your seats. We then go back to the landing page for the indication where we had the find a doctor, and we click go now. And what this window will do is it shows all the requests that were associated with clicking that button. And we're looking for a third-party plugin. So we're going to hover over each row of these requests until we find one that looks like it involves a third-party health information provider, so like doctor.com in this case. Sometimes it's a widget, sometimes it shows an API. This time it is a widget. So obviously it says HTTPS www.doctor.com. Well, that's obviously an external website. So now we want to know how is the Cosentix site interacting with this site? Is it asking for information? Is it putting information? What is it doing?
So why do I care?
Well, we care because you can have, okay, so these requests, they can be anything. There's settings, there's, other queries, there's actually like Google tracing information. There's all kinds of stuff in here, but we want to know, is clicking this button asking for information from doctor.com? Is it putting information from doctor.com on the Cosentix website?
Why do I care?
We care because that would indicate it's a third-party plugin. If it's not a third-party plugin, if let's say it's not there, then we need to ask and for the purposes of my study, I would have to mark that I could not verify that there was a third party involved, right?
Okay.
We're assuming that there's no logo. So there's no third party involved. I'm going to ding them. I'm going to ding Cosentix because I can't see a third party. I can't verify whether they're using one for certain in a legal sense, right?
The presence of a third party increases trust or decreases trust?
I am going to argue that it increases trust because, of course, it's illegal to use an in-house curated list of people.
Got it. Okay, now I'm with you.
Okay, so keeping in mind that this is not legal advice. So if we want to see for sure, we've established that there is some sort of outside website, but we don't know what's going on. So we double click on that row and it pops up a new window. And we can see that the request URL is for doctor.com and the request method is get. And get is very important because that is a request to retrieve data from the URL without updating it, without changing it. It's just, boom, I want this data, give me this data, I want to show it on my screen. And that sort of verifies that it is a third-party plugin, that the information coming onto the Cosentix site is coming from doctor.com. And if you're really interested in what is a GET request, there are other requests. There's a POST request. There's there's a lot of them. The W3 Schools site, and actually I included a link to it on this slide, is actually a really great way to learn. It's free and it's actually a really great site for learning about networks and how websites are designed, how they're coded, and actually they have a lot of programming languages. If you're a super nerd and you want to program, there you go. So that explains how I do the third-party plugin bit, because explaining it with an outline would have taken forever. Were there any questions on that? Should I move on? Are we still awake?
We're still awake.
Okay.
You can move on.
All right, let's move on. So now we're going to evaluate for attunement. And we're going to review opportunities for patients to contact some sort of a representative from the website. And actually what I have done here is I've pulled part of the outline over so we don't have to switch back and forth. So we've established that attunement requires awareness, response, and harmony, and that it needs a two-way communication. And it is possible to look at these through a website analysis without actually having to contact someone using the website and get a response back. I mean, that could be possible. That could be a study, but that would then be something that probably would require IRB approval because it would involve another human. So two-way communication opportunities are known to increase trust. Availability of patient support information on a website is representative of attunement because patients actually want to contact companies, and they may not realize they're dealing with a third party. But the drugs discovered report that I read indicated patients want to communicate with Pharma directly. They want to feel heard. And obviously, there are a lot of ways that they sort of can do that. There are websites where they can talk about medications that they've taken, knowing that pharmaceutical companies will get. But that is not a direct, two-way interaction. So I wanted to look not at those websites, but at the brand websites and their customer contact information. So willingness to respond to a patient who initiates contact fulfills the two-way communication requirement for attunement. And I did find a study that talked about two-way communication with a brand. It wasn't a healthcare brand, it was just a brand, but it led to increased trust, overall satisfaction, levels were up, and there was actually a better word-of-mouth customer advertising for the brand if there was appropriate two-way communication. And actually looking at support resources and ease of accessing resources follows usability constructs from the WWAMI survey that I showed you a sample of earlier. So how do we evaluate contact information? So I'm looking at the brand websites. I want to find patient representative contact information that supports two-way communication. So it's not email, it's not a comment form. It needs to be something that can be direct two-way contact. So things that I'm analyzing, is there chat available? Is there a phone number? Is there the ability, and some of them have this, where you can click the button, enter your information, and then receive a call back from a rep. And by a rep, usually it's some kind of a brand support representative, usually hired by a third party. Depending on the type of question, it could be someone who is more on the nursing side, or it could be someone who deals more with the cost side, patient assistance or copay program. And, I want to know, how easy is this information to get? So is it on the homepage? Is it on the indication landing page? And, you get more, or they will get more points for having more of these things. Is there a page that explains any outcomes of contact? Like, why am I contacting them? What do I need? What can I expect to receive if I contact them? Some, just from a quick look, some brands did a great job of this. Other brands did not do such a great job. So I wanted to kind of quantify who was doing a good job and who maybe could, use some improvement, or where everyone could use improvement, or where everyone was doing well. And it's just a matter of reporting the total points by brand. And I did not actually do a visual sample for this. It seemed like it was pretty straightforward. Any questions, comments, concerns?
I have none of the above.
All righty, moving on. So then, as we evaluate for integrity, we're going to look at disease awareness content, and we're going to look at it for quality. On the right, you will see this is actually a copy of the Medline Plus guide to evaluating health information on the internet. There are literally 4 items. That's the whole thing right there. But it does come from the National Library of Medicine, so I found that very interesting. I was not aware that they were really, pushing for awareness on, healthcare quality on the internet, but I was really excited to see it. So for written materials, integrity includes objectivity, accuracy, truthfulness, and scholarly references. And the Medline information here shows that patients are encouraged to evaluate online information for quality. There are also some non-governmental organizations like Health on the Net that are doing similar things. Some organizations, including Health on the Net, actually offer consumer healthcare website verification, and they have a seal that will show up on the website. And that's interesting, but that is not necessarily applicable to pharma. But it shows that that there is interest in educating patients about quality of the content that they're finding on the internet. So why would I want to, use quality evaluation tools on a brand website? Well, there's the Discern tool and there is the Han tool. The Discern tool is a 16-item standardized measurement. It was funded by the British Library and the UK National Health Service, and it's actually been used for over 20 years. Content review using these guidelines would be a measure of integrity, because these guidelines evaluate things like the use of scholarly references, objectivity of the text, and honesty of the text. It meets usability criteria for regular updates, because it does talk about, when was this information published, when was it written, when was it updated. So, that falls into the web usability guidelines that we had already established were important for evaluating. And on the right here, we'll see the Han code principles, which I have kind of borrowed, but you can see the source information if you're interested in learning more about it.
Angela, here's a question. Let's sort of take a step back, just so we have a 50,000 foot. Why do we care? Why do we care that there's the Discern principles? What are you going to use them for?
What am I going to use them for? Well, you mean in terms of in general, or the Han principle specifically?
Either way, in general, in the study, in the context of the study.
For the study, yeah. Because these are measures of integrity, there you go. Would increase the likelihood of getting patient trust. And the fact that other organizations are starting to train patients to do this means that it is important. And that, it's not just something that matters on WebMD, it matters everywhere.
Yep, absolutely.
So, I looked at the Han principles, and you can see there are 8 of them. And I looked at Discern and tried to figure out which one would make the most sense to use. And Han code uses a lot of website design elements and other information that was not necessarily useful when you're evaluating a pharmaceutical brand website. For example, financial disclosure. Well, we know how the site is paid for. Are there ads on the site? Well, not exactly. They're, pretty much the site is, more or less an ad for the product. So these didn't really fit, financial disclosures. Privacy, how is the data treated? Well, generally speaking, you're not giving your information to the pharmaceutical company as a matter of course when you visit the website. So that was more applicable to perhaps a site where, you would be buying something, or a site that offers something. So generally, you don't buy things directly off a pharmaceutical website, and except for very specific cases, you're not necessarily giving them your health information either. So it just seemed like Discern was a better fit, so I went ahead and used Discern. It focuses more on content, which works for everything, whereas the Han stuff, as we mentioned, has more to do with certain types of consumer sites. And I wanted to study disease awareness pages specifically because disease awareness information on a pharmaceutical website seems to be more about educating and less about promoting. And as I discovered, some of the sites are actually putting their disease awareness information with treatment landscape, and then they're adding actually promotional content to it, which was kind of interesting. We thought they would be separate, and it turns out they're not necessarily. So they're not strictly disease awareness pages in that there's branding information on the pages. They may be regulated as advertising materials, but I actually do think it's important to go ahead and review them anyway for things like objectivity. The content of disease pages uses sources that patients might want to look at independently. They may be pulling from governmental information. They may be pulling disease state data from a nonprofit. Pages like a disease awareness generally have fewer pre-approved brand messages than pages, like efficacy or, disease state or indication landing page. They tend to go more with pre-approved messaging, so you don't get, I don't know, it seems like when you're using pre-approved messaging, you're not getting a sense for how the brand is educating, because these are pre-approved. They're they're designed for advertising purposes, and I really didn't want to go full into advertising when I'm looking for quality information. I wanted to go into something that seemed to be objective.
Right.
So taken as a whole, disease information pages may serve as a baseline representation of the website integrity. If you can't find, quality information when you're looking for disease awareness, that seems like that would not necessarily be a good thing in terms of getting trust from the patient. Moving on. This is just a brief overview of the Discern tool, picture of the first page. And I actually wanted to go ahead and list the questions. I'm not going to read through all of them because we will see them again, but
Sure.
There are 15 questions, and the Discern handbook is designed to be a standalone guide. So it actually includes instructions for rating each question and guidelines for applying a Likert scale to the results. So it's pretty easy to use, really, and it's designed for patients to be able to use as well. So kind of an interesting little tool, and I actually had never heard of it before I started this study, which made me kind of sad, as it seems to be a very valuable tool. So I did a sample evaluation. I chose Skyrizi for this, and the page that I looked at was, what is plaque psoriasis? And my actual spreadsheet is a little bit bigger than this. It has a lot of columns because every single question is included. There's a spot to give my score, and then there's a spot for comments to explain why I gave the score that I did. I did not move all of those over here because there's not room.
And how are we going to ensure that, how do we reduce the bias of having one viewer, one reader, one evaluator?
Well, we could have two evaluators, but that might take a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a possibility. There were another evaluator who was eligible to do this. That would work. So that would probably be the best way to reduce bias. But again, it is 15 questions and 18 brands. So it is a possibility. But other than that, it's just a matter of following the Discern guideline, which is actually fairly specific in how it wants you to rate based on the content that you find.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to read through all of this because people may fall asleep, but we can see that in general, green indicates it did very well. Yellow.
I have a question. You have yellows, but there are no yellows in the questions.
There are no yellows in the questions. The questions that are not highlighted are the yellow ones.
Okay.
I could have highlighted, but I thought really it's more important to look at what did they do well, what did they do not so well, more so than what did they kind of do in the middle.
Got it.
So we see that the page achieved its aims fairly well. It was certainly relevant. It did discuss uncertainty. There was a mention that, we really don't know for certain what causes psoriasis. And, I enjoyed the way that they treated that. It was, very objective. And I know obviously there are compliance reasons why we have to be objective in that regard, but it was still nice to see it. And I thought the way it was presented was good. It was just something that patients could understand, and it was something that would make sense to them. It was clear that there was more than one treatment choice. They talked about, not in great detail, but there was a discussion of available treatments. And, certainly it made mention that you needed to contact your doctor before you're starting treatment, regardless of which treatment you did. So that, is expected, but it's still good. What did they need to maybe work on from a quality standpoint? There were no sources. There were no sources of any kind. So it was not clear what sources they used. There were certainly claims made about disease state and treatment landscape that could not be backed up by any known source. There were no details for additional sources. There wasn't a discussion of what would happen if no treatment were used. And I mean, I think that kind of depends on the indications. In this case, for psoriasis, they didn't really talk about, without treatment, this will happen. And it's possible that every website that I look at will be similar in that regard. I'm not sure. And, how treatment choices affect quality of life, that wasn't really discussed either. It may be that they choose to treat that, in the ISI instead of on the website. But again, if it wasn't there, I couldn't score for it. So,
but we get the general idea here, how you use it.
So some great, some not so great. So it'll be interesting to see how the other brands compare. But that's basically how it happens. So moving on, we are now going to analyze for reading level and complexity, which is competence.
Mm-hmm.
So reading level and complexity are measures of competence because they explain advanced knowledge to patients in ways that they can understand. Mm-hmm. It's also part of the user experience or web usability, ease of understanding information, and that is a standard component. And
so competence is not just being defined as do they understand the material, but can they explain the material? Yeah,
it needs to be easy to understand.
Yeah.
Which is different, I think, from struggling to understand.
Right.
And I think a lot of times even patient-facing information is written at a level that's kind of beyond the average patient. And, because again, it's not just maybe patients with low literacy, it's also patients who may have a disability. They may be, speaking English as a second language or even a third language. And, we have to allow for all of that when we're considering patient-facing materials. So, ease of understanding information, that's a standard usability criterion. For public-facing information, according to the NIH, we need to consider low literacy, disability with reading comprehension, and non-native English speakers and readers. The target grade level is 7th to 8th grade, so it would be a 7.0 to an 8.0. And the appropriate reading ease score, which explains...
Why did you choose 7.0 to 8.0?
How did I choose it?
Yeah.
Well, the WCAG, which is Web Accessibility for people with disabilities, they recommend 7th to 8th grade. And then Lawrence 2019 was actually a study that was done by, I believe it was an intern. And I want to say she was at the National Library of Medicine, but don't quote me on that. But certainly at a governmental agency, and she discovered that 7th to 8th grade was optimal as well. So we have, a basic standard, but then also a study that confirms it. So I'm comfortable with 7th to 8th grade. Although, incidentally, I didn't use it in this study, but I was curious. So I went out to a forum that is a healthcare-based forum, and I happened to pull information on reading grade level, and it turns out that they are speaking to each other at a 5th grade level. So on this particular forum, the average grade level was 5th grade. So even though 7th to 8th grade is, sort of a target for some sorts of patients and some sorts of deliverables, you may even want to go 5th grade. Which my understanding is that in Europe, that is more common to go more like 5th grade and less like 8th grade.
Interesting, I didn't know that.
Yeah, or possibly even 3rd grade. I think it depends on the agency.
Pretty sure at that point you're just going toddlers.
But actually, and this is a little bit off topic, but I discovered that that popular music is actually somewhere between a 3rd and 5th grade level now. That actually the reading level, comprehension level for popular music is going down as well, which is interesting. Not related directly to this, but certainly, should make us wonder what grade level we should be writing at. All right, so reading ease score, the higher the score is, the easier it is to read. And a lot of that comes from sentence length. I'm not sure exactly what else they use besides sentence length. I know it's, there's an algorithm that's used. But, for the purposes of this study, higher is better.
Just to be clear, though, Angela, I mean,
Yeah.
we don't have to get into the details of this because, again, people can read your outline. But what you're saying is that you're basically using a tool, and the tool spits out a number.
The tool spits out a number.
It's based on a variety of factors, things like
Yes.
sentence length.
Yes, it does. But we need to know what the benchmarks are. Otherwise, the numbers are going to be meaningless. So we need 62 or better. And that was actually based on a readability study that used written patient education materials. So I felt like it was extremely relevant for this study. So 62 or better, most patients will understand it. Flesh and Flesh Kincaid tools are going to be used for this analysis. They are considered appropriate for health information, health-related consumer websites. And actually the Flesh and Flesh Kincaid measurement goes back to the 1970s, and it is a standard used in military writing. So that's actually where it came from, was I believe it was the Navy. So it's a standard, it's used frequently, and it's appropriate for, I don't want to go ahead of myself, appropriate for this use. So now we're going to go into exactly what did I look at. And I did do one test brand so that I could show information. So for the reading level and sentence complexity analysis, I decided to choose Xeljanz, which is on my list of brands. Target grade level, again, 7 to 8. Reading ease should be above 62. The testing site that I used is called WebFX, and I included a link to the tool. I decided to use the text by direct input, and you can see a little excerpt of it on the right where it says clinical trials. So the clinical trials page, it was actually one of the pages on the brands that I looked at briefly, as I was deciding which brand to use and which page to use. It was consistently the one that had the most text on it. So a lot of the pages were video heavy, which would be harder to test. Image heavy, they had generally very little text on each page, but this one had enough to test. So,
do you think that's biased, though, by definition? You don't like that, do you?
Well, I mean, there's always bias when you choose one page over another page.
Correct, exactly.
I tried to minimize bias in that I will try to use the clinical trials information for patients for each brand, because it will be more uniform than if I were to choose a page at random from one brand versus another. So the type of information that's being discussed is the same. Clinical trials information is, it's fairly challenging to make it easy for patients to understand. So I think it's a good fit for reading complexity and grade level. But you're right, there is always some bias, and I will try to remember to include that.
Sorry, I keep interrupting you. What I'm also wondering is, does it make sense to get excerpts or sort of get translations or transcriptions and test those?
Transcriptions like of the videos?
Yeah.
Well, that would really only apply for patients who needed to use a text reader, so maybe visually impaired patients. In general, as far as I am aware, unless, well, I'm trying to think. The average, I'm thinking in terms of like patients who have reading difficulties. Their verbal comprehension is going to be greater than their written comprehension. Now, for people who are English as a second language, let's say, or they have a disability, it may be that they would both be useful. But since you wouldn't expect anyone, well, you would expect some people, but not most people, to be reading the transcript of a video, you wouldn't really expect that. Then that might be going a little too far afield. But certainly, should we be checking that? Perhaps. I mean, is language in these videos too far above the average patient? I mean, maybe we haven't looked into it. So maybe that would be a separate study.
Yeah, fair enough.
All right. Cool. So there is an excerpt of how Xeljanz treats their clinical trial text. And I added it by direct input instead of using the URL because I wanted to make sure that the ISI did not get in there. I didn't want to evaluate the ISI, just the text on the page.
To remind everyone, that's because we said the ISI is relatively standard. and that's outside the scope of what we're trying to go after.
Right. Okay, so we tested, and here are our test results. Our grade level is 13, so college freshman. Reading ease is 38.1. So can the average patient with a grade level of 7 to 8 understand this? Well, according to this, they may struggle a little bit, and they may struggle with readability. Now, something that always comes up is how much of this has to do with, medical terms that you just cannot use any other term for. And, sometimes it happens that you can't use a simpler term, a shorter term to describe a concept. I mean, there are some ways. There's, dictionaries for clinical trial information, I believe, that will help you translate more complex medical terms into simpler terms for patient materials. So, that could be used, but certainly it could be a confounder.
Makes sense.
Do you agree? Do you disagree?
No, I agree.
Okay. All right, so reading level, lower is better. We could do some work. Reading ease, higher is better. Could still do some work. And I'm not sure how it compares to other brands because this was the first one I actually, tested using the methodology. And that is the end. So I believe, am I still sharing? I'm not still sharing.
You're not still sharing.
Okay.
So is that the outline, or is
that is the outline? Let me just check to make sure we don't have anything else going on.
So what are the next steps after this, Angela?
So after this, it's pretty much just how am I going to analyze the information, which, given that my number of brands is 18, that's not really enough for a full statistical analysis. So I'll mostly just report the numbers.
Yep.
Possibly averages, possibly means, depending on what the numbers are, but certainly nothing beyond that.
And we'll be doing this online so people can see what we're doing.
We will.
And give us feedback as they want to.
Yes.
And what does your timeline look like going forward?
That is an excellent question. My understanding is that generally this project should be ready to report by like end of March, early April in terms of, say, a slide deck for a presentation.
Yeah.
So, that will be my timeline. It actually should not take all that long. I'm pretty confident that I should have everything ready to go by then.
Sooner. Okay.
Yeah.
And please keep coming back here so we can keep showing people the progress we're making and keep looking for feedback.
What a plan.
Thank you, Angela.
Thank you, Darshan.